Good afternoon, YouTube. This is Chuck. It's Tuesday, July 11th, and middle of the afternoon. I'm coming to you from over at one of the local parks. It's easier for me to, when I want to shoot a video, it's easier for me to get my mind together if I go out someplace and stay with the vehicle. I was going to try to shoot this one outside, but it's a little too windy. I think there'd be a little too much wind noise. So I'm trying something a little different. As you can tell, I'm driving my old truck. But what I want to talk about today is this is a Bigfoot subject. And quite a while ago, when I was shooting my numbered series, my Bigfoot Stuff number 1 through Bigfoot Stuff number 10, when I got into number 7, I talked about whether or not the Sasquatch people could heal. And when I was making that video, I talked about an incident that we experienced just real briefly involving one of our people by the name of Chris. And I didn't go into a lot of detail on that because it was his story, and I thought maybe at some point in time he should tell that story. Well, it turns out that he has, and he wrote a pretty lengthy email to another YouTube channel. And those of you that have been around the Sasquatch community much are probably familiar with it. It's called The Facts by How to Hunt. And it's run by a guy named Steve Isdall up in British Columbia. And Steve is, this is probably the largest by number of subscribers channel on the whole internet regarding this particular subject. He has quite a wide following, and he reads when people submit their stories to him. He reads their stories, and of course he does a little bit of his own research. But he has an awful lot of people that watch his channel, and from all over the world, and that's a good thing. He's done a good job in raising the consciousness about the subject, if you want to call it that. And getting the word out to people all over the world and allowing people to tell their stories. There's a lot of people that have never told their stories before, and they finally decide that people aren't going to think they're crazy. They're going to accept them, and so they tell their stories on his channel, and that he's performing a very valid service in doing that. So check out his channel. But anyway, Chris wrote an email to Steve, and Steve read it here about a week ago, and I just heard about it a couple of days ago, and I thought I'd go ahead and talk about it. I'm going to put a link to that video on the other channel. I'm going to pin it to the comments at the end of this video. But I wanted to add a little bit to the story from my perspective, and I was there when it happened, and it was quite dramatic. Probably at least in the top 5, if not the number 1 healing event that I've experienced. I've experienced some myself that have been pretty dramatic. So let me tell you a little bit about it. We hadn't known Chris very long, and by we, I mean Kevin and I. We hadn't known Chris for very long, and Chris was involved in a pretty serious industrial accident. And when he did that, it almost amputated his right arm. And he went through a number of surgeries, and he had virtually no use of his right arm at all. And of course, he was right-handed, and he was feeling pretty down in the dumps about the whole thing. And so Kevin kind of reached out to him and said, "Well, why don't you come up to Crazy Town with us?" And Chris said, "I can't do anything. I have no mobility." And Kevin says, "I'll take care of everything." So Kevin brought his big 2-room stand-up tent, brought an extra cot, sleeping bag, told Chris he could use Kevin's porta potty, and that he'd cook for him, he'd take care of him, he'd help him any way he could, but he just wanted to cheer him up and get him out in the woods a little bit. And so that's what we did. And so we went over to Crazy Town, the idea being for a couple of nights. And so we had some pretty interesting activity. And leading up to the night before Chris's healing event occurred, we had something kind of interesting that happened. And in order to tell you that story, I need to go back a little bit. When Kevin and I first started doing this, we've been we've been working together now for 6 years. I've been doing this for 12 years. I've told you that before. And so when Kevin and I started working together, we started using a different approach. We started looking for people instead of looking for undiscovered apes. And I've told you that story before as well. And so anyway, one of his first experiences out is the forest people left him a gift, and what the gift was a small rock, and it's where we were camped at. That was up at Squatch Camp, and Squatch Camp is primarily sandstone, and this was a little like a river rock that doesn't exist up there in the sandstone, so it was obviously brought from somewhere else. And they left it on Kevin's bumper. He was camped up there by himself at the time, and Kevin found it and realized there's only one way it could have got there, and so it's been one of Kevin's prized possessions. And I look at it, it's about 2.5, 3 inches in diameter, a little black river rock, but it looked to me like it might be a tool that was used by ancient people, maybe to treat leather or something, treat hides, to maybe a scraper to scrape the hair off of hides or something, because it has scrape marks on it, like it's been used for something. So I think it's a tool used by ancient people. But anyway, Kevin keeps that in his truck all the time, and he usually has it in his pocket when we're out on our trips. And well, this particular time, I hadn't even thought about the rock, and so came time to go to bed, and Chris decided that it was time for him to go ahead and turn in for the night, and Kevin and I weren't quite ready to do that yet. And so Chris went down to where Kevin's tent was at and went in there, and of course it took him a little bit because he's still wounded. He has no use of his right arm whatsoever. It's just hanging there, and so he has to try to do everything with his left hand, and he's not used to doing that yet. So he gets into the sleeping bag, and as soon as he gets in the sleeping bag and lays down, there's something poking him in the back. And so he sits back up, and he picks up, and it's a little rock. Now, Chris had never heard the story of Kevin's rock. And Kevin, on this trip, he'd kind of forgotten it, and it was in the cup holder of his pickup. So Chris thinks we're pranking him. He doesn't know us well. We don't prank about this stuff. We joke a little bit about it, but we don't do anything like that. We're serious about what we do. So anyway, so Chris calls out to Kevin. He says, "Did you put this blankety blank rock in my sleeping bag?" Kevin says, "No, I didn't. Let me see that." So Chris shows it to him. Kevin says, "That's my rock. That was my rock. That was in my truck. That was in the cup holder in my truck." So what it ended up happening is the forest people, they like a good laugh as much as anybody. They have a good sense of humor, and they will play tricks on you. Well, apparently what had happened is somewhere along the line, they actually got that rock out of the cup holder, out of Kevin's truck, and the doors were closed. It wasn't locked, but the doors are all closed. And they went in the tent. The tent was zipped up. They went in the tent, and they put that rock in Chris's sleeping bag as a bit of a prank. Now, there was only 3 of us there. Chris didn't do it. Chris didn't know anything about the rock. I knew about the rock, but I didn't know where it was. And the only one that was left was Kevin, and Kevin didn't do it. So the only thing left was that the forest people did that as a prank to let Chris know that they were definitely there. So Chris went to bed that night. The next morning, Kevin and I got up a little bit before he did. We usually don't have fires at night because of the light thing. We practice very strict light discipline. But a lot of times, if it's cool in the morning, we'll have a fire. And we had one that morning, and we were sitting around the fire. And Kevin and I both got up. I usually get up pretty early, around 5 or so. And so we were sitting around the fire drinking coffee. And Chris gets up and comes walking over there. And all of a sudden, he gets his face just got this whole different look. And he told us what had happened. He realized that all of a sudden he could use his hand. It wasn't perfect, But the night before, he couldn't use his hand at all. And when he got up and got out of the tent and went over in the bushes to relieve himself, when he got ready to zip up his pants, just unconsciously, he reached down with his right hand, which he had no use of the night before. He could barely move his fingers, just enough to say he could move them. And he reached down and was able to grab a hold of the zipper and zip his pants up with his right hand. And he did not, all of a sudden, the little light came on in his head and he realized he could do that. So he started experimenting and he realized that he had range of motion in his shoulder that he didn't have when he went to bed the night before. It was absolutely dramatic. And it was, if it wasn't a miracle, it was darn close to it. He came over and was telling us about this stuff, and he became so overcome with emotion that he was crying. And he's a grown man, and he's not the kind of guy that cries easily. And he was so overwhelmed that it took him days to wrap his head around what had ended up happening. Part of what had happened is that he didn't even have the flexor tendons in his wrist to make his fingers move. To this day, we don't know what the forest people did, but somehow they managed to reconstitute that to where he has a little bit of motion. One thing he couldn't do before, he's a smoker, and he could not hold a cigarette with his right hand. That morning, he was smoking, and he was holding a cigarette in the fingers of his right hand. Now, he's undergone quite a few surgeries. I don't know the exact number, but he's been through quite a few surgeries since his accident. He's been through a few since that episode happened. But that was so dramatic, and the change was so incredible that he didn't even know how he could tell his doctor about it, because it was theoretically impossible what had happened. Now, we've said before that we don't say anything's impossible because we have seen and experienced the impossible. And that's just one example of it. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about the story behind Chris. Like I say, I'll put a link to that video. I'll pin it to the comments at the end of this video. You can go and listen to it. Steve reads 2 or 3 other stories before he gets to Chris's. But anything you see on his channel, it references the Arizona 4. We are the Arizona 4. That's just a label we came up with. There's more than 4 of us. But one of our guys came up with that label just so Steve would know who he was dealing with. And if you go back into some of his videos, 2 or 3 of the guys have submitted stuff to him. I never have. I may someday. I don't know. I haven't decided. But go and watch that video. It's Chris's account of what happened in his words. But I gave you a little bit of background and a little bit of the sidebar to that. And with that, I think that's probably good enough for this story. I'm going to, as I always tell you, take care of each other, love each other. It's a nice day. It's probably around 90, and the humidity started coming in, so it's a little bit toasty today and a little bit steamy. The old Flapjack is here right with me, and you can see he's panting. So we're going to go home and get him some water here in a minute. I got another video I want to try to shoot about another subject, but I'm going to let you go for this one. Let me spin you back around. This is one of the ball fields. This is one with natural grass. A lot of them have artificial grass. This is one of the first ones. I come over here because I'm a little ways away from everybody and I'm in the shade and I think the lighting's good. So I'm going to let you go for now. I'll be back with you another one real soon. So right now I'll just tell you peace out.